possibilities. Readiness is quieter. It's knowing you won't have all the answers, but trusting yourself enough to figure them out as you go. It's choosing growth instead of guarantees. What I want you to know without saying everything yet is that this isn't about a ring as an object. It's about what it represents internally. Consistency, visibility, follow through. The willingness to be accountable not just to you, but to the version of myself I'm choosing to become. I don't want to rush this moment. I want it to land in a way that feels steady, not overwhelming. When I bring this into the open, I want you to feel the certainty behind it, not because I said the right words, but because you've already felt the shift in how I show up. There's still more to unfold, not because something is missing, but because some things deserve to be revealed at the right pace. And this, what we're standing on now, deserves to be handled with care, intention, and respect. If this message mirrored something you've been living through, your comment might say more than words. I started asking myself a different kind of question, one I'd never really asked before. Not, do I love you? Because that part was never confusing. The real question was whether I was willing to let my life be shaped by that love, instead of just inspired by it. There's a difference between letting someone affect your emotions and letting them influence your decisions. One feels safe. The other requires courage. I noticed how I began making choices with you in mind without consciously trying to. Not in a restrictive way. Not like I was losing myself, but like my priorities were reorganizing naturally. The things that used to feel urgent started to feel optional. The things that used to feel optional started to feel essential. That shift didn't scare me. What scared me was how right it felt. The secret lives in that space, in realizing that once you step fully into something real, you can't pretend later that you didn't know what you were choosing. You can't say you were confused. You can't hide behind timing or circumstance. You're accountable to yourself most of all. And I needed to be sure I was ready to carry that weight without resenting it. I paid attention to how I felt after we talked, whether it was light or heavy, draining or grounding. With you, it was always grounding. Even difficult conversations didn't leave chaos behind. They left clarity that told me more than any rush of emotion ever could. Chaos can feel exciting. Stability reveals intention. I've been shedding old instincts quietly. The instinct to delay, to overthink, to wait for some external signal that gives permission to move forward. But real decisions don't come with signs. They come with responsibility. They come with the understanding that once you act, you're choosing a direction. And choosing not to act is still a choice. There's something I haven't said because I wanted to be sure it was true before letting it live between us. I didn't want it to sound like hope. I wanted it to sound like fact. I wanted my actions to arrive before my words, not chase them. You deserve something grounded, not something dramatic that fades when reality settles in. I've been watching how you carry yourself when you don't feel seen, how you stay steady without demanding reassurance. That kind of self-possession doesn't cling, it invites. And standing next to that kind of energy made me confront whether I was showing up as a man who adds stability or one who benefits from it without matching it. I don't want to be admired from a distance. I want to be reliable up close. That realization didn't come all at once. It grew, slowly, honestly. And once it settled in, I knew there was no going back to the version of me that kept important things hidden just to feel safe. The ring hasn't moved from where it is yet, but what has moved is me. My mindset, my posture toward the future, the way I hold the idea of of us not as a question mark, but as something that asks to be handled with intention. I'm not building toward a moment meant to impress you. I'm building toward consistency meant to support you. When this finally comes into the open, I want it to feel inevitable, not surprising, like something your intuition already knew before I ever said a word. There's still one layer left to speak about, one truth that changes how everything before it is understood. And when that comes out, it won't sound like a confession. It'll sound like ownership. There's a part of this I haven't touched yet, because it changes the tone of everything that came before it. It's not emotional. It's not poetic. It's practical, in a way that makes things real instead of romantic. And that's exactly why I waited. Because once this is said, there's no pretending this was just a feeling or a phase. I didn't just buy a ring. I started restructuring my life around the possibility of you being permanent in it, quietly, without announcements, without asking for credit. I looked at my habits, my routines, the way I handle stress, the way I disappear when things get overwhelming. I didn't like everything I saw, and instead of asking you to tolerate that, I decided to change it before asking you to trust me with more. That's the part people don't talk about. Commitment doesn't start with a question. It starts with preparation, with removing the parts of yourself that would eventually hurt the person you claim to love. I didn't want to hand you a symbol while still carrying behaviors that didn't match it. That wouldn't be fair to you or honest. I realized that the secret wasn't about hiding something from you. It was about making sure I wasn't offering you a future that still depended on you being patient with my unfinished work. You've already been patient enough in your life. You don't need another situation where your calm becomes someone else's excuse to delay growth. There were moments I wondered if you could feel the internal shift before I ever spoke it. Not because I said anything differently, but because I showed up differently, more present, less reactive, less defensive. I stopped treating stability like something that would limit me, and started seeing it as something that would free me from repeating the same cycles. I've been paying attention to how I handle conflict now, how I sit with discomfort instead of escaping it, how I don't immediately reach for distance when things feel heavy. Those changes didn't come from pressure. They came from respect for you and for what this could become if handled correctly. If this felt calm instead of dramatic, that's intentional. Tell me if you noticed it. The truth is, I didn't want to ask you to walk into something I wasn't already walking toward myself. I didn't want you to feel like you were stepping into uncertainty while I was still deciding. If I'm going to offer you clarity, it has to be real, not aspirational. And there's something else. I didn't want the ring to be the moment I became serious. I wanted it to be the moment you realized I already was. That's a different kind of offering, one that doesn't rely on emotion to carry it forward. You deserve to be chosen by someone who's already standing still enough to mean it. So if you felt a shift lately, less hesitation, less vagueness, more grounding, it's not accidental. It's the result of decisions made quietly, consistently, and with intention. Decisions I didn't announce because I didn't want applause. I wanted alignment. What's coming next isn't a surprise in the dramatic sense. It's a reveal in the honest sense. Something that's been forming long before it ever gets said out loud. And when it does, I want you to recognize it not as a sudden change, but as confirmation of what your intuition has already been picking up on. There's another layer to this that I haven't spoken, because it's less about growth and more about accountability, about the part of me that had to admit that love doesn't just ask you to add things, it asks asks you to subtract habits that no longer fit. I had to look at where I was still choosing convenience over clarity, comfort over courage. And that kind of honesty doesn't feel noble while you're in it. It feels uncomfortable, necessary, quietly demanding. I started noticing how often I'd postpone decisions that deserved direction, not because I didn't care, but because delay felt safer than commitment. Delay keeps options open. Direction closes doors. And I had to accept that choosing you means being okay with certain doors staying closed, not out of loss, but out of focus. That realization didn't make me feel trapped. It made me feel grounded in a way I hadn't experienced before. I also had to confront something personal. The way I've used independence as a shield. Not the healthy kind that keeps you whole, but the kind that avoids reliance altogether. I learned to stand alone so well that I forgot how to stand with someone without bracing for impact. You don't collide with people when you love them, you align with them. That shift took time to internalize. There were moments I wondered if saying nothing was kinder than saying something unfinished. Because unfinished truths can create uncertainty, and uncertainty can erode trust. I didn't want you interpreting hesitation where there was intention. I wanted intention to show itself first, consistently, before language ever caught up. I've paid attention to how you navigate your world, how you don't announce your strength, but live from it, how you don't need validation to remain steady. That kind of presence doesn't ask for promises, it observes patterns. And knowing you could see through inconsistency forced me to become consistent without being asked. I've also realized that the secret isn't dramatic. It's not something that shocks or disrupts. It's something that stabilizes. It's the understanding that once you choose someone intentionally, your life stops being a series of reactions and starts becoming a structure. You build around what matters instead of fitting what matters into whatever's left over. The ring hasn't been waiting for a perfect moment. It's been waiting for congruence, for the moment when my words won't have to compensate for my actions, when what I say won't surprise you because you've already been living in the evidence of it. Some realizations don't hit loud. They settle comment. Steady, if that's how this felt. I've stopped negotiating with myself about readiness. Readiness isn't a feeling you wait for, it's a posture you take. It's deciding that the life you want requires participation, not observation. And I'm done observing from a safe distance. What comes next won't be loud. It won't be rushed. It will be steady. And when it arrives, I want you to feel the difference not because it's impressive, but because it's aligned with the way I've been showing up, day after day. There's still more to say, but it needs its own space. Not because it's heavier, but because it reframes everything before it. There's a moment that keeps replaying in my mind. And it isn't dramatic. It's almost ordinary. We were talking about nothing important, and you laughed the way you do when you're not trying to be anything for anyone. In that moment, it hit me how rare it is to feel calm and connected at the same time. Not excited, not anxious, just settled. That's when I realized I didn't want a future that interrupted that feeling. I wanted one that protected it. I started thinking less about milestones and more about rhythms. How days flow, how disagreements get handled, how silence feels when it's not loaded with avoidance. I asked myself whether I was building a life that could hold another person gently, without asking them to compensate for my blind spots. That question changed how I moved. I became more deliberate, not slower, clearer. There's a misconception that certainty arrives fully formed. It doesn't. It assembles itself through repetition, through showing up when no one's watching, through choosing restraint over impulse, consistency over intensity. I noticed how my reactions softened, how I didn't feel the urge to defend myself the way I used to. That's not because I cared less. It's because I finally trusted the ground beneath me. I also had to accept that some of my old fears were loud only because I kept listening to them. Once I stopped negotiating with those voices, they lost their authority. Fear can be persuasive when you give it airtime. Silence, intentional silence, starves it. That's the silence I've been practicing. Not distance from you, but distance from the patterns that kept me circling instead of choosing. I don't want you to inherit my unfinished lessons. I want you to meet the version of me that's already integrated what it learned the hard way. That doesn't mean flawless. It means accountable. It means when something feels off, I don't disappear. I stay. I talk. I repair. I don't outsource my growth to patience I didn't earn. The ring, in all its simplicity, represents a life lived in alignment. Not a grand promise shouted into the void, but a quiet agreement with myself to live visibly and responsibly, to let my actions be legible, to let my intentions be readable without needing translation. I've been careful not to turn this into anticipation for you. I don't want you waiting on a reveal. I want you feeling the steadiness that comes from consistency, the sense that nothing is being withheld, only handled with care. There's a difference, and I respect you enough to know it matters. If you felt me become more present, more grounded, less evasive, that's not coincidence. It's practice. It's me choosing to inhabit my life fully instead of hovering near it. It's me deciding that when I offer you something symbolic, it will be backed by behavior that's already in motion. What's left isn't suspense. It's timing with integrity. And when the moment comes, it won't feel like a reveal, it'll feel like recognition. Like something that's been true for a while finally being named. I'm still here, still moving forward, and still choosing care over noise, depth over display. There's something else I had to come to terms with, and it wasn't flattering. I had to admit that part of me liked being admired without being accountable, liked being wanted without being required. That space where affection exists but responsibility hasn't fully arrived yet. It can feel comfortable if you've lived there long enough. Walking out of it means you don't get to be ambiguous anymore, and ambiguity had been my hiding place. If this brought clarity instead of confusion, I'd love to know. I began to understand that love doesn't just reveal who you care about. It reveals where you still hesitate to grow. You didn't point those places out in me. You didn't name them. Your steadiness did. Every time you stayed grounded without clinging. Every time you spoke honestly without escalating. It reflected back the areas where I still needed to mature. That reflection was unavoidable. I thought about what it would mean to truly be chosen by someone like you, not temporarily, not emotionally, but structurally, chosen in routines, in planning, in the way life decisions are made when no one's watching. And I realized I didn't want to be someone who received that kind of devotion casually. I wanted to be someone who could meet it with equal seriousness. I also recognized how easy it is to confuse depth with intensity. Intensity burns hot and fast. Depth holds steady. With you, nothing needed to spike to feel real. There was no constant proving, no emotional volatility disguised as passion. That kind of calm doesn't numb you, it stabilizes you. And stability forces you to face yourself without distraction. I started asking myself whether I was willing to be consistent even when there was nothing to gain immediately. No praise, no reassurance, just the quiet knowledge that showing up matters even when it's unseen. That question reshaped my understanding of commitment. It's not about grand declarations. It's about reliability in the ordinary. I noticed I wasn't performing anymore. I wasn't trying to say the right things or time moments for impact. I was simply aligning my days with the future I didn't want to keep postponing. That alignment brought a kind of peace I didn't know I'd been missing. Not relief, clarity. The truth is, some people wait for certainty before they act. Others act until certainty arrives. I had to learn that certainty grows through action, not contemplation. Waiting for perfect confidence only delays what's already asking to be lived. And I don't want to live in delay anymore. This isn't about crossing a threshold dramatically. It's about standing still long enough to recognize where you already are. I've been standing here longer than I realized. The only thing left is to stop treating readiness like a private thought and allow it to exist in the open. There's one final shift that hasn't been spoken yet, not because it's complicated, but because it's definitive. Once it's said, there's no returning to ambiguity. And I want that moment to land with the steadiness it deserves. So I'm taking my time not to hesitate, but to honor what's already in motion. There's a truth I had to sit with longer than I expected, because it stripped away one of my last excuses. I had to admit that part of my hesitation wasn't about fear of the future, it was about fear of being fully seen in the present. When you commit in a real way, there's no room to curate yourself, no selective honesty, no hiding the rough edges behind charm or silence. You show up as you are, consistently, and let that be enough. That level of exposure changes you. I realized how often I used momentum as a substitute for intention. Staying busy, staying in motion, letting life happen instead of shaping it. With you, that stopped working. You're not someone you can drift beside. You require presence not because you demand it, but because anything less feels dishonest. That awareness slowed me down in the best way. It made me intentional instead of reactive. Not everyone will relate, but if you did, your comment belongs here. I began to see how commitment isn't about control or certainty, it's about stewardship. Taking responsibility for the space you hold in someone else's life. Being mindful of the weight your words carry. Understanding that consistency isn't boring. It's sacred. And sacred things don't need constant reinforcement. They need care. There were moments I caught myself wanting to explain everything in advance, to narrate my process so you'd understand the pauses. But then I realized explanation can sometimes be a way of asking for patience instead of earning trust. I didn't want to ask you to believe me. I wanted you to see me, see the follow-through, see the steadiness, see the absence of retreat when things got quiet or uncomfortable.